On a freezing winter morning, an elderly man opened his cabin door and froze. Three German Shepherd K9s sat in the snow, their eyes desperate, their bodies trembling from the cold. He thought they were strays, until he saw their collars. What he did next shocked an entire town. The forest lay silent beneath a thick blanket of snow, every branch heavy with ice, every sound muffled by the storm that had swept through the night. In the middle of it all stood a small wooden cabin, smoke rising gently from its chimney. Inside lived an elderly man named Walter. His life was quiet, shaped by years of solitude. He rose early, chopped wood for the fire, and spent long evenings reading by the dim glow of lanterns. The cabin was humble, but it was warm, and it was his sanctuary from the world. That morning, as the wind howled and the snow piled high, Walter wrapped himself in a wool blanket and stepped to the door. He expected only silence and cold, but what he found instead would change everything. Shapes moved faintly in the distance, shadows against the endless white, drawing steadily toward his cabin. Walter squinted into the swirling snow, his breath rising in frosty clouds. At first, he thought the shapes were deer wandering too close to his cabin. But as they drew nearer, the outlines became clearer. Three German shepherds, their fur heavy with frost, their movements stiff and tired, they stopped a few feet from the porch, sitting in the snow as if they had been waiting for him. Their chests rose and fell with labored breaths, and steam curled from their muzzles. They did not bark, did not lunge. Instead, their eyes fixed on him, pleading in a way words never could. Walter's heart clenched. Strays, perhaps? But there was something different about them. Their posture was disciplined, their gaze steady despite the cold. One lifted a paw, trembling, as if begging him to understand. Walter's grip tightened on the blanket around his shoulders. Whatever had brought these dogs to his door, they weren't here by accident. Walter stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching into the snow. As he drew closer, the truth struck him harder than the icy wind. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were exhausted, half-frozen, and near collapse. Frost clung to their whiskers. Their ribs showed faintly beneath damp fur, and their eyes were glazed with fatigue. One shepherd limped, favoring a front leg wrapped with a torn strap of leather. Another shivered uncontrollably, lowering his head, as if the weight of the cold was too much to bear. The third nudged forward weakly, pawing at Walter's boot before lowering itself onto the snow in surrender. Walter knelt, his breath catching. He had seen stray animals before, but never with this kind of dignity. Even in suffering, they sat in formation, watching him closely, waiting. His gaze shifted to the worn collars around their necks, faint markings visible beneath the frost. These weren't strays. These were trained dogs, K9s. And something terrible must have driven them here. Walter's hands trembled as he reached for the closest shepherd. The dog flinched at first, then leaned into his touch, as though the simple warmth of a human hand was enough to keep him alive. "Easy now," Walter murmured, his voice soft against the howling wind. He turned back toward the cabin, pushing the door open wide. A rush of heat escaped into the frozen air, and the dogs perked up at the scent of safety. Walter beckoned them inside, his blanket slipping from his shoulders as he ushered them one by one across the threshold. Their paws left wet prints on the wooden floor, melting snow pooling behind them. Inside, the dogs curled close to the fire, steam rising from their damp coats. Walter rummaged through his pantry, breaking off pieces of bread and leftover stew. He set it down gently, watching as they ate with a desperation that broke his heart. For the first time in years, Walter felt less alone. Something bigger had found its way to his cabin. As the dogs warmed by the fire, Walter finally noticed details he had missed in the storm. Their collars were not ordinary leather straps. Each bore faint markings, the edges scuffed but clear enough to read, Police K9 Unit. His breath caught. These weren't lost pets. They were working dogs, trained protectors. He leaned closer, running his weathered fingers along the tags. Numbers, faded names, even a unit insignia were etched into the metal. The realization chilled him more than the storm outside. How could three trained police dogs end up abandoned in the wilderness? Starving and broken? Something was terribly wrong. One shepherd shifted, letting out a soft whine, then nudged its collar toward Walter as if urging him to see more. His eyes narrowed, suspicion mixing with dread. These dogs hadn't just wandered here by chance, they had come with purpose. Walter straightened, heart pounding. Whatever secret they carried, it was waiting to be uncovered, and fate had chosen him to find it. Walter's eyes caught a flicker of something unusual beneath one collar. With careful hands, he unclipped the strap and found a folded scrap of paper tucked tightly against the leather. His heart thudded as he smoothed it open, the edges damp and nearly torn from the cold. The handwriting was hurried, jagged with desperation. Unit compromised. Officers down. Need backup. Follow the dogs. Walter's breath froze in his chest. These K9s hadn't stumbled here by accident. They were carrying a message, a lifeline meant for anyone who would listen. That he looked back at the shepherds, their weary eyes fixed on him with quiet urgency. One pawed toward the door, then back at him, as if begging him to understand. Walter clenched the note in his fist, a storm of dread and resolve crashing inside him. Somewhere out there, men and women were in danger, and 3 loyal dogs had dragged themselves through the snow to bring the warning. Walter stood at the cabin window, the note trembling in his hand. Outside, the storm howled mercilessly, snow piling high against the trees. At his age, the thought of venturing into the wilderness was daunting. But the shepherds rose to their feet, tails stiff, eyes locked on the door. They were ready to go. Back, ready to lead him. He packed quickly, a lantern, extra blankets, and what little food he had left. The dogs pressed close as he wrapped himself in heavy layers. "All right, boys," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Show me where." With that, he pushed open the door, and the night swallowed them whole. Through knee-deep snow they trudged, the shepherds forging a path with unyielding determination. Walter followed their pace, lungs burning, heart pounding. Every bark echoed, like a beacon, pulling him deeper into the frozen forest. The note's words replayed in his mind. Officers down, follow the dogs. Somewhere ahead, lives depended on them. And despite the storm, despite his age, Walter knew he couldn't turn back now. The forest finally opened into a clearing, the snow reflecting the pale glow of Walter's lantern. There, half buried beneath drifts, lay the wreckage of a police vehicle. The shepherds barked furiously, circling the site, their paws digging frantically at the snow. Walter dropped to his knees, pulling away chunks of ice until his hands stung with pain. A muffled groan answered his efforts. His heart leapt. Beneath the twisted door, an officer stirred, pale but alive. Walter shouted hoarsely, signaling the dogs, who clawed faster, clearing space. 2 more figures were uncovered, injured, weak, but breathing. The note had been right. Without the K9s, they would have frozen before morning. Tears stung Walter's eyes as the shepherds pressed against the officers, licking their hands, whining with relief. "You boys did it," he whispered, voice cracking. By the time rescue teams arrived, guided by Walter's signal fires, the truth was undeniable. The town hailed him a hero, but he shook his head. "Not me," he said, resting a hand on a shepherd's fur. "It was them."